Serious people of Reddit, what's your, if I'm going down I'm taking you with me, story? Was rock climbing, and this guy who was my belayer for the day was kinda a dick. Well, no surprise, Dickwad spent most of his time flirting with a cute girl who is friendly, but seriously not into him. He gets chewed out by our lead for not paying attention, which means he continues to not pay attention as he is incapable of picking up cues. Well, there's me, 25 feet or so off the ground with my rope slack, and feeling my hand slipping, because I'm just running out of steam. Now, having told him 3 times to pick up the slack, I look down and see he's completely ignoring me to chat with this girl again. My mistake was looking down as I reached to readjust my weakening hold and slip. The rope shoots out of his limp, sausage-like fingers and I begin to fall. I know a properly tied off rope shouldn't do that. I don't know how he faked that up too. My only thought is, if I'm going to fall, I'll damn well land on him. Well, I did. I landed straight on his cushy, as whole body. I was barely injured. He was taken to hospital after having 80 odd kilos land on him from 2 stories up. I never happened to see him at that rock climbing club again. Super simple, but I'm notorious in my friend group for having a fear of water. I'm okay in pools since you can, hopefully, see the bottom, but even shallow lakes, rivers and oceans are a no-go for me. Some friends ended up renting a boat and wanted to take it out on the lake and begged me to come out. I kept telling them no way in hell would I ever willingly go out and sit in the middle of a lake. Finally I caved because I dunno. They were friends and really wanted me to go. Someone said it could really help me face my fears. Even though I didn't plan on getting in the water, I'm not going to wear jeans to the sunny beach, so I left my wallet, keys, and phone in the car. Within 10 minutes of getting to the middle of the lake, my buddy suggested I face my fears and I think his brother asked me if I had the time. I shrug and tell them I left my phone back in my car. They both lunge at me and start throwing me overboard. I latch on for dear life and fight, as if the river is lava, because to me it essentially is. I eventually realize I'm 100% going over and there is nothing I can do except let go of the railing I was gripping onto and instead grab them both as I pulled back and forced all 3 of us into the water. Getting back on the boat was easy. It had a little ramp and ladder for climbing in/out, and you can bet your ass I was the first climbing back up. The brothers got mad at me because they had their phones in their pockets and I ruined them. But everyone quickly pointed out that they pushed me in the water knowing I hated it and that they deserved it. They argued that they intentionally tried to make sure I didn't have anything electronic on me, but everyone shut them down. They were allowed back on the boat when they apologized. My friend apologized, and I actually did chip in to help him get a new phone later, but his brother swam back to shore and got even more upset and demanded I help him with his new phone since I helped his brother. But he didn't feel bad or think he did anything wrong, so fax that guy. When I worked as a case manager as in mental health and mental retardation, we had a new department supervisor come in, and she was the worst. Every single person but myself and another case manager quit within the month of this woman starting. I really liked my job, and it was also my internship site for my master's degree, so I needed to stay employed there. Since so many people quit, this lady got permission to hire, and it soon became obvious that she wanted to get rid of anyone she hadn't hired and have a department full of people she had personally chosen. Surprise surprise, most of her hires were facty just like her. On top of being an awful human, she also had very little background in mental health and gave truly awful supervision when it came to clients and getting them the services they needed. Since I wasn't a part of the people she had hired, I knew she would try to get rid of me, so I made sure to document everything. Anytime I staffed a client with her, I would document her advice in that person's chart as well as the actions I took due to her advice. I also kept a detailed paper trail and would email her questions about policy so that I'd have a record of her answers, which usually were the opposite of what our policy actually was. She even started walking to my desk to verbally give me answers to the questions I sent via email, and I'd have to make up some excuses to why I needed her answer in an email. Like I would tell her a parent or client had asked, and I wanted to be able to give them a verbatim answer. I could tell she hated it. Anyway, several months later, I staffed a client with her who I believed needed to be hospitalized and wanted to run it by her first as she demanded. The kid was suicidal, homicidal, and impulsive, which is a recipe for disaster. She disagreed that this kid needed hospitalization and told me to refer the client to another agency because apparently the client was too high risk for us, but didn't need to be hospitalized. I tried to get her to agree to just calling a crisis to assess her, but she denied that as well. I documented what she told me to do and referred out. Well, literally a day later, this kid brings a gun to school and gets in a ton of trouble obviously. Thankfully he was stopped as soon as he stepped through the metal detectors. Mom is pissed that my agency just referred him out and didn't get him the help he needed, and a day later he plans to shoot up his school. My supervisor's supervisor is pissed as this is a PR nightmare and comes down on my supervisor, but since I was the direct care staff assigned to this client, my supervisor blamed it all on me. I ended up getting fired for my negligence. However, the higher up of course carefully went through this kid's records and saw all of my documentation regarding the awful decisions my supervisor had made, which led the higher up to investigate even more. Basically there was Medicaid fraud being committed. This lady was lying about her mileage and being reimbursed way more than she should, and all this other lovely stuff. So she was fired as well. I was asked to come back, but fax that place and its corruption. When I was in university I did a 6-month exchange program in Spain. I took 4 classes while I was there and all had an equivalent credit at my university in Canada. I was getting A's in all of my classes, except one class, where I was really struggling, and getting a failing grade on an assignment in that class finally broke me. The prof for this class was the worst. It was an intermediate Spanish class, and he was marking us like he thought we should all be writing Shakespeare. Not only that, but how he told us to complete assignments vs how he marked them would be completely incongruent. He expected us to be doing things that he never taught us, and he should not have been expecting in the first place from an intermediate Spanish class. I realized it wasn't just my problem when the girl from France, whose Spanish was far better than anyone else in the class, started crying one day after she got an assignment back and begging to understand why she was marked so poorly. He just pointed at her assignment like that was the only explanation required and then ignored her after that. There was no way to drop the class or switch into another because of the way it was built into the exchange program, so I decided I would start emailing the teacher constantly after he gave us assignments, clarifying every little point, coming back with follow-up questions to try and figure out what the hell it was he actually wanted from us, spending way more time on assignments than they deserved. That way if I failed I would have this record showing how hard I was working in the class to bring to administration if I needed to fight it, and all the discrepancies between how he provided assignments vs how he marked them. A couple of days before the final exam, teacher evaluation forms came around, and I could tell by how long it took all of us to turn them in that I wasn't the only one in the class unloading on this guy. This was his first semester teaching at the university, so if his teacher evaluations didn't go well he wouldn't be invited back. If I failed this class then at least that as whole wouldn't be doing this to someone else next semester. We get our final marks a week later, and I've managed to pull a C out of my ass. Great, just squeaked by. Then with final marks dispersed he's allowed to see his teacher evaluations. He sent an email to the entire class that night and lost his frightened mind. We are talking sections with all caps, multiple exclamation marks, telling us how fucking stupid we all are and how we don't know what we are talking about. He's the greatest teacher alive and we're all just bad students. Complete meltdown. The next morning I found another email from the university, this time stating that the professor as whole is no longer with the university and will not be welcome back again, followed by numerous apologies regarding his behavior. I inquired about our grades in light of what happened, but I guess they weren't that apologetic because they refused to change them. Go figure. Current job, previous manager. I was on a team of 2, and when the lady I worked alongside quit, they decided not to replace her. I have a young child who, as children so often do, gets sick a lot. being the only person on my team and the most important role for our office to function, since it is literally the first step in all our processes. I had a very hard time whenever I used my paid time off with short notice. I had given my manager multiple ways to fix the issue, but she never would hear any of it. She also was in a remote office, so she had zero clue what I did with my day. She finally sent me a very angry email basically telling me I could not use my paid time off for emergencies all the time. When my son got sick, I wrote back a long detailed list of every method I suggested to fix the issue, along with the fact that I was the only person in my position for months, and that our company policy states in bold letters that using paid time off because you or your loved one is sick is not only acceptable, but encouraged. My manager responded to my email by stating she would forward my concerns to human resources and that I should probably polish up my resume. But human resources was in our office that day for the first time in 6 months. Great coincidence, right? So I went in, asked if I could speak about an issue concerning my manager, and explained everything as it happened. The human resource rep had this look on her face, like she was going to murder someone. She asked me to forward the entire email chain to her, which I did. Then she called me back to talk to her. A few people I talked to were aware that the manager and I had issues, and the lead of every team in our office basically told the human resource rep that the entire office can't function without me, and that I've been doing the work of 3 people for 9 months. Later that day, my manager sent me a very angry message over email basically saying I was fired and that I was to pack my things immediately for failing to do my job and because I was causing a hostile work environment. I forwarded this to the human resource rep and then walked to her office and asked if I should pack my stuff. She looked at me and in a single sweet sentence said not a chance, she's royally faked. And that's basically how my manager went from making $80k a year to being fired on a Wednesday with no compensation, no benefits, and no way to collect unemployment. All around a productive day. When I was in 8th grade, we had to create a presentation on a book we had just read, including a skit from one of the scenes. Here's the best part: we were forced to work in groups. Being an introvert, I hate group work. What I hate even more is when your group mates don't do their work. The day we were assigned the project, we decided to divide up the slides equally. It was a Google Slides, so we could all contribute to the same document. The class ended, and I had already finished one of my slides. One boy only changed the color of the title, and the other 2 didn't do anything. 2 days later, I had finished all of my slides. Nobody else had done anything. I offered to start the script for the skit, since I had finished, and asked for the others to contribute. Nothing. A couple more days passed, I had finished the skit as well, and all of the other slides were still empty. Finally, the night before the assignment was due came. I had hoped that even a title had been added. The slides were still empty. I finally decided to just finish it myself. I was up until about midnight, and the slides were not the best quality. Finally, presentation day comes. Of course, my group mates felt absolutely no remorse for doing no work. It was our turn to present, and my group mates nominated me to present. I finally decided to show them the consequences of their actions. I told them that we were all to present the slides we were supposed to work on. They obviously didn't know what they were doing and were extremely unprepared. My grade went down, but theirs went down even more. I was at a church camping trip for boys at Yosemite. One of the guys in charge was new and a real douche. He made it his goal in life to punish every kid. I was a real rule follower, so he couldn't punish me, and he started getting angry about that. He would even drop comments like "your turn is coming," etc. Now, when I was younger, I was really thin and small, but in my mind I was like all the other kids and mentally tough, so this got me in trouble. I would get injured on these trips and the head guy was always getting in trouble with my parents for not keeping me safe. So one of the rules is that nobody can ever be alone. If you are caught alone at any time, you are in trouble. So, we are getting the campfire ready for lunch, and some kid comes running up to the group and says that there's a woman bathing naked in the river. All the kids get up and run to go see. So, to not be alone, I have to go with the group. Now, I don't go to the edge and look. because I didn't feel like it was right to spy on the poor woman just trying to enjoy nature. Anyway, douche leader sees his opportunity and says that since I got up and went over with the group, I was also in trouble, despite the fact that I had no other choice. Punishment at this camp was holding a giant rock over your head. Somehow, I was the only one that got in trouble, not everyone else that looked, proving that he didn't care about actual rules, but just that he had power over everyone. I was supposed to hold this rock over my head for 15 minutes and then come back. Of course he was too lazy to oversee punishments, so I was supposed to do this alone, which is another problem, since there are bears and perverts around. No kid is supposed to be alone. So finally, since I didn't deserve this punishment, I was going to take this guy down. So I dropped the rock on my head on purpose. Then I just laid there. I could feel a large bump rising on my head. I must have laid there for about 35 minutes. Finally, they realized that I didn't show up for lunch and someone asked where I was, and then everyone ran over to see me laying there with a rock next to my head. I said that the last thing that I remembered is that my arms were getting weak holding the rock over my head. Then the leader checked my head and found the bump. He was livid because now he had to tell my mom I got hurt again. When asked why I was holding a rock over my head, I made sure to let them know that it was douche leader's punishment. He tried to deny it, but 25 young voices called him liar simultaneously, since they had all endured the same punishment. Douche leader was stripped of his power and spent the rest of the camp as just another camper. In fact, he called someone and left a day early. It was his first and last activity with the group. My uncle used to own a hardware store in our facty little town. He wanted to put up a cover between two buildings that he owned, but the town council wouldn't let him. They never gave any real reason like, we need to leave the area uncovered because of his building codes. They just went on a power trip and said, you're not gonna do it. Eventually, due to some other power trips, my uncle threatened to move his shop a few towns over. Town council went all, you're not gonna do it, in a I dare you way. So my uncle did just that. If I remember correctly, he paid the most in taxes, so all the money the town was getting from him disappeared. Most of his employees were in high school and couldn't drive. When he moved, the kids went with him. Since the parents had to drive their kids to their job, they decided they would also pick up groceries and other things they needed while they were in the new town. So the cloth shop and grocery store went out of business. Since no one could get what they needed in our small town, just about everyone moved. Now the town is run down, and there's barely anything here. My dad said it used to be a nice little town. Now hardly anyone lives here and everything is falling in. My uncle even warned the council, if I leave I will take this town with me. But they didn't listen. I had a group project I had to do with 4 other people. 3 out of the 4 were great, but there were roles each of us had to fill in the group for the project to work right. The final girl never once participated in the project, so her role was completely empty, and it was dragging the rest of us down. We couldn't just fill in for her either, because she kept her specific instructions to herself, the other 3, and I did the best we could, but our instructor didn't seem impressed. He had a few questions about how we came to our conclusion, and who did what in the group. The other 3 were trying to keep focus on the roles they filled, but the instructor was asking about the role that the one girl skipped out on. I answered that we didn't have anything from that role, because what's hers didn't come to any of the project sessions. We just did what we could without her. Until that point, the girl that didn't do facts was standing there acting like she deserved any of the grades we all got. Once I said something, the other 3 girls confirmed that yes, Becky's did 0% of the work. She tried to say she was just really busy, but another girl shut her down by saying she saw her at several parties the past couple weeks. That girl got a 0 and the rest of us got like an 85, or around that number. I felt like a snitch, but facts that girl. A company I worked for was in a downsizing period, and they were complete pricks about it. I worked on a floor of cubicles, so everyone knew when something was up, and the year before this story went down, human resources walked into a cubicle, and walked out a woman who'd worked for the company for about 15 years, no warning, no morning tea, nothing. They then came back for another 2 long-termers. This was 2 weeks before Christmas. Real bastard level move. So the next year I worked hard and delivered some good projects, hoping to help the company bottom line and maybe help my team avoid the same fate. But rumblings came around that it nerds were being looked at as downsized by upstairs management. I have no problem with this in many ways. Business is business. But when it came to less than a week before Christmas and my access card to the building stopped working, I knew I was gone. I had no access to the systems I managed, and human resources watched me walk into the building and they asked for all my access cards and my company phone, which I handed over immediately. It was explained to me that I wasn't needed, so I thanked them for the opportunity to work with them over these years, told them to call me if I could be of any help in the future, and walked back out. They even handed me a box of my things from my desk, so thoughtful. I could feel them mentally congratulating themselves on the savings they'd just made. My colleague and I, let's call him Steve, were the only two chuckleheads who knew how most of the systems we managed were put together. Not surprising in a company our size, and since Steve was junior and paid less than me, I figured he wouldn't be first on the chopping block. The company shut down a lot of the central administrative teams like ours over Christmas/New Year break, and they'd let Steve have the week before Christmas off. So now with me gone, no chuckleheads until early January. But the factory still ran, products were still being made. It was okay though, because the systems had run pretty much perfectly for years and the teams were all on call 24/7 if they wanted to keep their jobs. Except, Steve had gone back overseas to visit his family, and he talked to me about his camping trips to the mountains. No phone, no internet, no computers. He loved it, quiet time with his family. I knew he'd be completely out of contact for the whole time. And since we all thought I'd be available over Christmas, that wasn't a problem. Unfortunately, I'd left some simple basic maintenance tasks until the last week before Christmas break, so I could do them when it was all pretty quiet and no one was using their computers. Lots of staff parties, etc. Many of these real simple tasks involved pushing one button here to update security certificates, one button there to configure links between new systems, and generally making sure that licenses and subscriptions were maintained. According to the phone call I received over Christmas break, a significant number of systems had gone down and no one could get hold of Steve. I offered to help, but explained I was interstate, and flying back would be very expensive, not to mention inconvenient, and I told them working remotely was out of the question due to security issues. I received one very short call from a higher manager who very carefully didn't accuse me of sabotage, but I knew that was his thought. I reminded him that he'd personally taken my access off me before I even knew I was being fired. I did mention that he still had my documentation and several competent techs. He didn't have other competent techs, they were all useless, and we both knew it, but they were cheaper. I heard from Steve that he'd gotten everything back up and running within about 3 hours of getting a phone signal back from another country. Presumably that helped cement his job for the time being. I sent him a post-Christmas present of his favorite beers and forwarded him vacant positions from the companies I worked for afterwards. When you are in trouble at school, it helps that you're related to someone who works for the school district. I had a math teacher my junior year of high school who was also the cheerleading coach, and she worshipped every student who was an athlete. And she hated theater kids. She would make theater kids, or basically any non-athlete, trade seats with a student athlete because they'd need a better seat to view the board. She basically told us that student athletes' education was more important than ours. One day, the drama club was planning a field trip the same day of a really big math test. My math teacher was already fully aware of the field trip and said that the theater kids are allowed to take the test at another time. Well, the day of the field trip comes, and she pretends she is unaware of the field trip. She called up our drama teacher and threw a tantrum that the theater kids were missing. We then got in trouble with the drama teacher, and we received a 0 on the math test. I told my aunt, a math teacher, and the head of the math department for the whole entire school district, about this, and she looked into it. Teacher didn't get fired, but got in trouble. Well, she found out that it was my aunt that reported her, and now she was purposely failing me. I actually had no trouble in math, especially since my aunt was tutoring me, and I was doing well, so there was no reason why I was failing except for the fact that the teacher wanted revenge on me for getting her in trouble. So this time I told my aunt, but in a different way. I say that my teacher's material is not making sense, which was actually true. She had no idea what she was doing, and my aunt called her up and asked her what she plans on teaching her students. My teacher was caught by surprise and didn't know how to exactly answer my aunt and kept giving BS answers. My aunt then looked into it some more and confirmed that basically the teacher had no idea what she was doing. And well, she got fired. I did have to take summer school since I still failed her class, but I basically ended her teaching career. In one of my first jobs, a colleague who was threatened by me, the new worker, shy, inexperienced, learning little by little, just out of college, was slowly putting ideas in the head of my boss until I got fired. The day after I was fired there was a meeting with the boss and other important positions in which I had been working hard to make a good impression. I knew who would take all the credit, the lazy bastard who had stabbed me in the back. It turns out that one of the things that I knew how to do was synchronize the files on my personal computer to an internet cloud in order to have my files available at home. I knew that my partner was too lazy and would not thoroughly review the documents, so from the comfort of my home I modified the presentation. Some information here and there, nothing excessive, and like the icing on the cake, a hidden message after a photograph on the last panel that would only be visible during the presentation. Thank you for not paying attention to the erroneous data and not looking at the information that does not match in the least with what I exposed. I'm glad nobody will notice because they are not interested and will not ask any facts. Fuck off, I would like to have been there, but as far as I knew the whole floor heard the screams of my boss. I know, it wasn't very mature, but it was satisfying. Got a bad math teacher fired when I was in high school. He taught advanced math for the older high school kids and the guy really was a math genius. He didn't want to be a teacher and didn't have a knack for teaching. His style was more it's right there, just do it. And we were all like, we are 16 and taking pre-calc, you need to break it down for us. This isn't an Ike commercial. But he never did. He always skipped steps and we all were struggling. And we were kids who were talented with math and always got good grades and were in the accelerated math program. Over half of us were failing his class. I kept going to the principal and the head of the math department with complaints, and I encouraged all my classmates to do the same. Some kids dropped the class, but I stuck with it because I was determined that if I was going to fail that class I was taking the teacher out with me. He wanted to be an expert mathematician for the government anyway. Teaching was just a fallback option for him. He told us about it all the time. So after half the class failed his class and the school had gotten a multitude of complaints about him from his students, they still couldn't fire him due to tenure. So the following school year, they scheduled him to supervise study halls and answer phones exclusively, and didn't give him any classes to teach. He threw a fit and refused to do it, so they got him for insubordination. He has since moved on and landed his dream government job, and the school is rid of one faculty teacher. So overall, it was a win-win, even though it brought my grade point average down. Had an absolutely terrible boss at a hospital. She had been there for almost 30 years and was almost omnipotent. She was an absolutely horrendous human being in every way, shape and form. She liked to pick one person every day at random that worked with her and pick on them until they cried. She would then fake false feelings about how sorry she was, that she didn't mean to do it, and so on. Our department ran the Toys for Tots drive at our hospital. She insisted that all toys were kept in her office. It didn't take me long to figure out she was stealing the toys. I took photographic evidence as well as writing down everything I could in the ensuing months about everything she was doing. I knew at this point she knew that I did not like her and that I had pretty much figured out what she was about. So she turned her attention to me and made my life miserable. I finally did quit. However, I made it my mission to take her with me. Everyone in the hospital, including the CEO, we are somewhat afraid of her, and we are just trying to get her to her 30 years so she can go out naturally. After I quit, I sent photos and all of my written documentation to the CEO of the hospital, who I had tried to talk about all of this stuff with before I left, but could tell he was not listening. I then wrote, if she was not dealt with, I was going to notify the local news channels about what I knew was going on with her. Needless to say, she was forced to retire immediately upon her 30th anniversary, which was a week away. I did customer service for a major cable company as tier 2 internet support. First native English speaker you spoke to. I worked for a third-party company that was contracted by the cable company. The company was terrible, like Walmart terrible. I got written up for hitting the exact minimum quota, intentionally, every month without improving. They promoted people to managers as a trial for 3 months, then put them back to their previous position. There was no pay change, and I had to quit my part-time job that I loved because they couldn't get the schedule correct. My new manager was a grade A jerk and was trying to get me fired, and so I decided to bring him with me. Shortly after he took over, he actually was friendly towards me and actually messaged me on work chat about an escalation call he was on. The guy's going to kill himself because he didn't have internet, and proceeded to joke about the guy killing himself. Now work chat can be configured to save everything locally on your personal computer, and I made sure it was set for that to cover my butt. I decided to quit about a month after this incident, sent my resignation to human resource and him. Attached was also the transcript of the conversation, and I cited that as one of the biggest contributors to my leaving. He was let go. When I was in my second year of Canadian high school, basically 8th grade, our final English project was to make a movie in teams. This project was going to take half a year to make, and was worth a lot of points in our grades. I was pretty hyped up, because I love doing amateur movies. Our class had 7 boys, me, my 2 friends, 3 guys that were known for being lazy AF and unfun to work with, and another guy who was useless in the story. So me and my friends had to be paired in teams with the 3 other guys, but at least we were 3 willing to work, and one of the other guys looked to be willing to work seriously with us. Before we started working on the script, a group of girls were missing 2 people in their team, and my friend just joined them, leaving me with the 3 slackers. The whole process was a nightmare. We had a shared account on Google to keep the script and video clips, so we could all work on the project, even when we were not at school. The script, that I almost entirely wrote, was often grief-stricken by one of the guys who found it funny to put racial slurs all over the script while filming. My teammates kept dragging on and doing nothing. The racial slurs guy purposely took 2 hours to correctly read 1 sentence in front of the camera. We were not moving forward as fast as we were supposed to, so the teacher was suspicious of what we were doing. One day, I was forced to miss school because of a dentist appointment, and those fakers decided to take advantage of my absence to go tell the teacher that it was all my fault for everything, including griefing the script. When I got back in the afternoon, I was stared at by the whole point class and was promptly told by my teammates and by the teacher that I was now out of the project and would be getting a 0 if I did not give a complete script and a 5 minimum plus movie, but it was for the next Monday, so I had only a weekend to make a half a year project, so I couldn't do anything and got a 0. I was pissed out of my mind, and then I remembered the shared account. I went back, deleted the entire script, and replaced the movie with a corrupt file, which they didn't check, before giving it to the teacher. I don't know how, but the teacher managed to reserve a whole movie theater room for the sighting, and all the English students were there. I was able to see their confused looks as their movie didn't play, and everyone else did too, since we all had a sheet with which movie was coming next. When the teacher checked, there was no script and no movie, so they got a 0 too, and since they forgot I could still access the project, I got no facts and the blame went to them. I might have not passed my English class that year, but I made sure neither did they. Got assigned to a pretty bad group in a school project, programming, with this guy who claimed to know everything as my co-programmer, while the 2 others in my group were doing the research, marketing and writing aspects. First couple of meetings went pretty okay, mostly brainstorming, which for my fellow programmer became more like boasting his skills. We decided I would handle the interface, and he would make sure it connected to the system we were building. Dude proceeds to not come to 6 meetings in a row and not respond to emails, text messages and calls. We thought he had dropped out, leaving me with very little time to finish everything. The teacher understood, but still wanted a finished product. We were working in a language I had never used before, and starting from scratch was incredibly difficult. I decided to take one for the team and just take the blame for the project failing. 1 week before the due date, this dude shows up all jolly like, "So guys, how far are we?" fully expecting us to be done and get a decent grade. He couldn't believe we didn't finish it and had made nothing himself. At this point we were sick of him and tried kicking him out of the group, but the slimy snake he was, he went to the teacher with some sob story and got a second chance from the teacher, not from us. Due date, just the 3 of us. He's nowhere to be seen. Teacher gave him another faking chance of getting a grade, claiming well he worked on the code, so we can at least grade him on that, but he'll lose points over the presentation. That was too much for me, so I let my mates present their part and just deadass deleted my code then and there, showing nothing and taking a massive fall faxit. I decided to drop out already, but this scumbag was coming with me. He actually showed up when we were all at the bus station waiting to go home, and after hearing of our massive defeat he thought he could sweet talk the teachers into a third chance. I wish I could have been there when they asked him for his work. Must have been beautiful. Couple years ago I got jumped by 2 guys while I was on a business trip. I was a little drunk walking back to my hotel at night, dressed well. So from the get-go you know I'm a moron. As I was walking I heard 2 guys yelling, but assumed they were just arguing among themselves and didn't even look back. I felt a sharp pain in the back of my head and my legs went a little wobblier than before. This little faker had punched me in the back of the head like a coward, but I caught myself before I face planted and I turned around and grabbed the guy. At that point I wasn't thinking much. I didn't register there were 2 of them. I just wanted to hit the little faker back. Side note, I'm 200 pounds at 5 feet 11, not really fat, just a stocky person. The guy who hit me was much skinnier. I took the skinny boy to the ground by just running forward and holding his shirt. I think when I landed on top of him, it knocked the air out of him. Then my mind oddly remembered that one of the few moves illegal in the Ultimate Fighting Championship is a 12-6 straight down elbow when on top of a guy. So naturally I did that. I got my elbow deep inside his eye socket 1 or 2 times before I was abruptly reminded he had a friend. Boots taste like ass, and they really can break your concentration when violently introduced to your face. But as the proud owner of a Neanderthal brow line, my thicker skull spared me from interruption. I put my elbow through that skinny boy's face another couple times, while his equally little friend continuously swung his foot into my head. At that moment I wanted to kill that kid. I didn't care what happened after. I was just going to make sure he regretted hitting me. I realize now that before and after that night, I have never really been mad. A little ticked off, sure, but never truly angry. After maybe the 3rd kick I was starting to really feel it. I was getting dizzy and my face hurt pretty bad. So I stopped ice picking skinny faker's brain and just covered my face with my arms. The other one pushed me off, though I'm pretty sure I helped. After all my job was done and my head was swimming. Then they just kinda left. It was outstandingly awkward in hindsight. Didn't take my wallet, didn't get my phone, didn't say anything threatening. They just walked away, one holding the other up, while I sat there and watched. As wrecked as my face was, skinny fakers were a lot worse. Despite all the words I just wrote, this whole thing happened in under a minute I think. Adrenaline slows things down, but in reality violence is fast and people are pretty fragile. In those 3 or 4 kicks, my face was mangled. One eye was swollen shut, my forehead and cheek were all cut up, my teeth on that side felt loose, and my lip was in 2 pieces. But judging by the fact that my elbow looked like I tripped into a vat of ketchup, skinny faker was a lot worse. Some woman apparently watched the whole thing go down, so cop cars pulled up pretty soon after. But whatever she saw makes no sense to me. No matter what I said, they were convinced this was a tussle between friends. She had thought we were walking together, then fought for fun or something. The cops kept asking me where my friends went, kept telling me that what I was doing could get me in a lot of trouble. Every time I explained what happened they told me I was lying. The fact I still Had my wallet seemed to convince them it was not a mugging, or whatever. After what felt like an hour of bleeding out of my face, and answering the same loaded questions repeatedly, they just kind of gave up. They drove off, and left me a little paper instruction manual on how I could call them to follow up, if I wanted to. I think they finally accepted. I didn't know the other two because I was from a different state, in town for like 2 days. I still had to walk back to my faking hotel, at night, with one working eye, covered in blood. The shred of respect I had left for American law enforcement died that night. The first person to seem at all worried about me was the front desk clerk at the hotel. He was ready to call an ambulance, but I just wanted to sleep. I washed myself up, and went to bed. The next day was one of the worst of my life. I still had a conference to attend, in business attire, looking like I was an extra in Fight Club. And calling my mother was hell. She was so worried, it just killed me. May sound faked up, but the one bit of solace I get, is that I changed the geography of the little faker's face. My fax healed up in a few weeks. I know he didn't. Months later I got mail from that police department saying that they were sorry, but they were not going to find anyone, and I could call if I wanted to complain. I didn't. Sorry for the time. It's kind of cathartic for me to write it all out, and I thought it was relevant to Op's question. Just happened last Saturday. I've been accused of buying minor alcohol at the shop I work at. Of course I didn't, but they don't see it like that. I was too awkward to say no to the person who asked, so I went to the till and said X wants me to buy him these. I don't want to, so can you say that you can't serve me it, to the person on the till. However, she scanned it and pressed the payment button. So I had to get it refunded, and now they have a record of me buying said alcohol. The supervisor that doesn't like me had to refund them and put in the logbook that I was buying X alcohol. Now I've been put in a world of facts and management aren't taking my side of the story at all and not bothering to ask the person who was on the till what happened and taking what the supervisor said at face value. I can see why. It's my word. The guy who's been there for 7 months against a supervisor that's been there for well over half a decade. If this accusation sticks and it gets on my record, then I decided that I'd tell every dirty secret of all the people who've given me facts to the manager. I'm not too fussed about the fine. It's £750 apparently, and I can pay that in 2 or 3 months. I'd tell them that a supervisor is stealing stock. The same supervisor sits on the phone talking to her boyfriend. Another supervisor who let kids shoplift, and which night is best to do it on. The first supervisor who is using the work computer for Facebook games, workplace bullying and sexual harassment. The person who stole from the till. Again, the first supervisor who doesn't do her job to the detriment of others. Why nothing got done in the shop, etc, etc. I'd do this because I want to be a teacher, so if this gets on my record I can't become one. What school is going to accept someone who's been accused of buying a minor alcohol or having buying a minor alcohol on their record? So if this shop is going to fax me over, I'd fax them over. Not sure if it fits, but it's a decent story nonetheless. Back when I was like 13, I was at my grandma's house with my older brother and my cousin jumping on the trampoline. Well, unbeknownst to me, they had schemed up a plan that involved them pantsing me and running off with my shorts. Not only that, but they also took my shoes that were at the base of the trampoline and tossed them into the yard. It's well worth mentioning that my grandma's yard was filled with every type of sticker you could imagine. Goat head stickers, burrs, and some little tiny one that was black and split in 2 like horns. They itch like hell too when you pull them out. Also came complete with poison oak/ivy, bull nettles, and thorns. So I was essentially stuck in no man's land. Well, after being stuck there for 5 to 10 minutes and my brother and cousin taunting me, I decided I would stick it to them and moon them. Well, right as I dropped trow, a cop drove by and saw everything. Pulled in and said, "What the hell are you doing, son?" I explained my situation to him and told him what happened, and he chuckled and made my brother and cousin go grab my fax. My grandma came out freaking out because she saw the cop, and once he told her what happened, she started cracking up. I work for a boat rental company on the lake in my city. I don't own a boat license, which is in general not really important, because our boats are used for picnics and stuff, which means they are drivable without a license. What is important, however, is that the speedboat we use doesn't fit that criteria, so to drive it, we need a license. It's used for rescues and whatnot. Back to the story. There's this one kid who went to my school at the time, who was a goody two shoes, and has a jealous streak. Except for being overly good and bragging about it, he brags about drinking at school. He applied for the same job I did, but I ended up being the one to get it. He wasn't pleased. I ended up talking to my friends about the job and telling them that I didn't have my boat license at the time, and apparently he overheard. Anyway, eventually he came with his group of friends about a year later to rent a boat for the day. After they set off, I got notified that there was trouble with the boat and I went on the speedboat. I head up to them within a couple minutes and of course it's them. I fixed the issue with the tiller handle, and conveniently the water police for the lake drive by, and this kid who still is annoyed about not getting the job said he has been working here for a year and doesn't have his boat license. That pissed me off. They were about to fine me when I said this kid underage drinks. I got fined. He got in big trouble with his parents. At least I didn't lose my job. But I'll learn to get my license, lol. So to preface this, the high school I went to had two options to choose from when enrolling. Show up a period earlier than everyone else. Leave a period earlier after school. Schedule your classes later. Get out later, blah blah. I had a drafting class last period. It was pretty straightforward. You are given an assignment, and when you are done you put it in one of the 3 drawers at each desk corresponding to your class, and it gets graded later. No idea why, but my assignments always sat in the drawer and never got graded. After about a semester of this bullshit I just stopped doing my work. One girl near me was shy and having a hard time understanding the work, and the teacher started giving her facts about it, then pointed to me saying something along the lines of, "Don't be like him, he doesn't do anything." I ignored him, and after that I started ditching that class. At first I just walked off campus and walked home telling the guards that I was on the earlier schedule. No way they verified at the time if you were or not, so they let me go. After some time I started waiting for a friend, and instead of loitering outside of the school in the ghetto, I just went to his Algebra 2 class. The teacher actually let me stay, and it was basically a second algebra class, where I could actually ask questions. I did the classwork, I did the homework. Around the end of second semester I got called to the office and my dad was there. We talk about grades and they then bring up my large number of consecutive absences in a single class. I told them on the spot that if you were lined up and waiting for everyone to enter the classroom one at a time, and you were still waiting when the bell rang, you were marked absent, not late. This was mostly true, and it didn't happen often in my class. I'm off the hook and keep ditching class until the end of the year. The year ends without much else going on. I moved schools, and the next school year a friend of mine messaged me telling me the drafting teacher showed up for the next year and was fired by the principal when he got to the drafting room. Apparently, when the school first asked me about my absences and I explained to them the teacher would just only mark absences, they also got the same story from other students they asked that day. They went through all the attendance and asked other kids about it. Other students were also not getting their work graded the same as me, and I suppose mentioned it when questioned about their failing grades. May not have been my hand that pushed him off the ladder. I may not have played a huge part in it, but goddammit, just having even a tiny part in this guy getting fired was all I needed. Okay, now this one I got. Back in college, I was working for a local company that installed water filters and water softeners. The owner was a fantastic salesman, but a decidedly middling manager. He'd do sales, the company would boom, he'd hire more staff, and settle into managing things. Business slowed, he cut staff, went back to selling, it'd boom, rinse and repeat. I was in college. This was a part-time job. I was doing 3 hours a day, 5 days a week shop cleanup, picking orders, unpacking stock, repairing stuff, things like that. The shop manager and I had a joke that he did everyone else's work and I did all the work. That was nobody's job. Together, we pretty much kept that company running. I liked the job, I liked the people I worked with, but it was never a question whether this was more important than school because, well, one was a facty part-time college job and the other was my future. Eventually, a new quarter started, and my classes changed. The owner didn't want me to change my hours, but eventually relented. The next quarter, he doubled down and actually fired me, but the shop manager threatened to quit as well, so I was unfired. Shortly after that, the owner offered a compromise. He brought in a guy who was going to have the exact same job description I had, but work mornings on the days I had classes, and afternoons on the days I didn't. It really couldn't have been more obvious I was being replaced. But hey, the new guy was nice enough, and he loved doing inventory and other detail work, but wasn't very mechanically inclined. We divided up the work along those lines, and sure enough, the shop was fine with me doing my job in the afternoons and pre-prepping for the mornings, when I couldn't work. A month later, the owner realized he couldn't afford to pay us both to do the same job, doubled the new guy's hours, and fired me. The new guy had no idea how the shop ran, and didn't care to know. It was a predictable disaster. The good news was I had a new job lined up already, and both the new guy and the shop manager quit within a few weeks, because they were so disgusted by the owner's flailing. A year later, the business was gone. We were playing Mario Party 3 to 5, I don't remember which one. One round left, I have not had much luck, and have done lackluster on games. First place, Kevin with 4 stars and 8 coins. Second place, Austin with 2 stars and 25 coins. Third place, me with 0 stars and like 130 coins. Fourth place, Tony with 0 stars and 32 coins because he sucks. I had held 2 slow dice so that I could land on the old roulette wheel bamboozle thing that allows you to steal coins or stars from an opponent based on a dart throw. I'm last to roll. It's the last turn. I hit my 3 to land on it. Still gotta make the most of the steal though, and I somehow time it perfectly to steal 2 stars from an opponent. Austin thinks he's won it because I can rob Kevin and put Austin in first. Austin talked a bunch of facts the last few times we played though. Without saying anything I just clicked on his Yoshi and Kevin just started cheering because he was still safe at the top. Not only did I steal second place, but now Austin is out of stars and Tony, who limped through the game like Walt Jr. takes third place. Austin was so mad that he left immediately after, which was funny because he was my ride. He was my neighbor. We were at Kevin's. Tony had to give me a ride home, but he was happy to because he'd come fourth in like 10 over 11 games. Now Austin had a 4th place, and that alone made it feel like a win. My landlord tried to bill me about $1,000 worth of water, essentially billing for all the water spent by all tenants. I told him I needed to see the bill from the water company. He said it didn't exist, it was by his own calculation. Well, I told him it was a bullshit, and he threatened to evict me, so I paid. However, I also joined a tenant association and these guys will take a landlord to court and undress him. I told my landlord I had joined the association and to just stay put as they would soon get in contact with him. After a couple of days my landlord shows up at my door with a piece of paper saying he will repay me and lower my rent if I just stop the case. I asked him how much he would lower my rent and he said $80 a month. I took the paper and tore it up, shut the door. Couple of days later he's back, this time saying he will lower it for about $130 a month. I sit him down, take the piece of paper, and hold my pen to it. Then as I'm about to sign it I go, say, there's some paint on the front door. Would you mind removing it? He's all pale now but says yes. I then put my pen to the paper, but just before I sign it, I again go say, it would be really nice if you could clean up the lawn. He agrees again. I think there was one more thing, and then he signed it. My rent is nice and low. My landlord is the scum of the earth. There have been 2 more cases where the piece of filth has tried to evade the law but us tenants have nailed him. I even had the distinct pleasure of screaming in his face what a waste of human life he is. I used my height and my deep voice and really scared him. I'm not done with him either. He must pay until the bitter end. On mobile, so I don't know how the formatting is / will be. I'm currently thinking about taking down the Church of Scientology with me. I'm a former staff member. They put me under their bullfuck justice for no production while I was on staff. The real reason for lack of production is that barely any people walk through the damn front door, but I'm the one that gets in trouble anyways, even though I was trying to get people into the building. Thing is, throughout all of 2019 and more than likely earlier, there were some shady financial dealings between parishioners and the church. Parishioners would lend each other money in the tens of thousands of dollars range to do services, and the person taking the money never paid them back in the end. There were also registrars that would set up credit lines for parishioners to make donations to the church, sometimes without permission. The first part was rumored to have been happening globally in organizations around the world, and staff members have been demoted/transferred for this. I have no proof of these dealings, but I do have the names of people involved in 2 of the previously mentioned loan type deals, which would be 4 names. The church's upper management is currently trying to fix this issue that the lower class churches have put themselves in, and have paid off one of the loans that I have names for. This is my secondary Reddit account, so this can't be traced back to me. All I know is that given this information leak, it can be potentially horrendous PR for Scientology as a whole, and since my church screwed me over, the idea of taking them down gets my dick hard. Since my church decided to fax off and leave me alone, I've been much less angry in life every day, and my love life had improved. The worst I get now is bored at the most, but not that angry anymore. I love Scientology itself, but the church is faked. Too bad my girlfriend is still on staff, as this will certainly complicate our future. I love her, but I fucking hate the church and want to see it burn, figuratively and literally. The internal financial crisis they are having makes me happy. I'm willing to answer any questions and make any future edits, as I'm sure I've missed some bits of information. An ex, might I add, friend of mine was chatting with me at home while my parents were gone at work. We were slowly getting more irritable because slowly but surely growing up was splitting us apart. He wanted to see who could punch each other the hardest, and I was like, hell no, fam. I ain't doing that. And he called me a bussy after I declined. He said that if we didn't do what he asked, he would leak out my most embarrassing secret to everyone in school. Before I go any farther, though, I should tell the secret now, since there's no point in hiding it. I was in my school library in 3rd grade. This friend was my friend then. My ex-friend was sitting at one of the tables, reading a book during after hours of school. School had just released, so no one was there, of course. I accidentally dropped a book, and when I bent down to grab it, my pants nearly ripped directly in 2. I was embarrassed to high hell, and my friend saw the whole thing unfold. Continuing on with the story, I naturally declined anyway despite the threat. And to be expected, the next day of school, everyone was picking on me about the incident. So I leaked his most embarrassing story. This was a story he'd shared from his young childhood. He was at a pool at the age of 6 and really needed to go to the bathroom. When he went to the stalls, he had no idea what the symbols for the men's or women's bathroom meant, so he just walked in one of the random ones. However, the one he walked into was the women's bathroom. He had just finished washing his hands after taking a big dump, and he was spilling water on the floor. Some lady was walking in at this time. When he finished, he turned off the water, slipped on the mess he made, and landed in the lady's privates. He never bugged me again. I first smoked weed about 7 years ago. At the time I was very much a lightweight and I could get $60 worth of bud and it'd last me about 6 months. As it turns out, all of my co-workers at the time also smoke, either regularly or once or twice. My co-worker S decided that she would make jokes about me being a pothead for our boss. Every day she'd crack some joke about me being a pothead and her, and the doctor would laugh about it. S also smoked weed, as did my manager, and just about everyone else. So one day we are all sitting at the front desk and S decides to crack her stupid joke, and I'm feeling really tired of it. Since I have the whole office there, I decided to stop taking her this. Me, hey S, wanna tell the doctor who else in the office smoked weed? My manager turns to her computer and starts snorting suppressed laughter. S is just stammering and doesn't want to answer my doctor, who? Me, tell him S, you're not shy about tattling. At this point all of my coworkers are rolling with laughter, and my doctor decides to guess. Since no one is answering his question, he guesses the one coworker who isn't present at the time to defend herself. So I said way, to pick the only person in the office who doesn't smoke yells, I haven't. Me, really yes. Cause you've been bragging differently. It was just a couple of times. She stormed off and never mentioned it again. Mine is a little bit more wholesome than some of the crazy events some of y'all have lived through. When I was young, my dad and I used to do stuff that he'd always say, don't tell your mother. Like maybe getting some ice cream on the way home, or having some fast food somewhere before dinner, or silly pranks to her and my brothers that would confuse the facts out of them, but we'd keep our mouth facts and giggle about it later. This one time, mom had announced she was gonna make my favorite meal for her. I was ecstatic. I go help dad with some chores as well, and some grocery shopping. On the way home he asked if I wanted some ice cream. I'm like 7 years old then. There's no way I'm not gonna say no. And he went and bought me a huge chocolate soft serve ice cream. I'm sure a few of you are already guessing where this is going. Skip about 20 minutes later, we're home eating dinner, and I'm too full from the ice cream, so I'm not eating as eagerly or as much as was my usual, and my mom just made me save it for later. I can't remember exactly what I did later that night, but mom was furious about something I know I did wrong. And my dad immediately was like, oh, it was easily delight. And I was shocked. How could he betray me? And immediately I turned and was like, the reason I couldn't eat my dinner was because dad bought me this huge ice cream on the way home. Oh boy. That fax almost turned into a Scooby-Doo scene where my dad was chasing after me and my mom was chasing after my dad. But we were laughing our ass off. And then I got sent to sleep earlier for whatever it was I had done to get reprimanded for in the first place. My last year of high school I had this really abusive teacher. I realized that by going to the principal about it was making it worse. I was also a psychology major in college at the time. So I sat back for a while to figure out what sets her off. None of us were doing anything wrong. I discovered that declarative sentences were perceived as a threat to her well-being. I mean, it's very windy outside would upset her. So I put my psychology lessons into work. Every day I managed to make her leave the room completely upset. We then happily did our schoolwork in peace. I was getting very sick by the end of the semester. However, I refused to miss a day of school. If she thought this abuse would go unpunished, she was wrong. I eventually told my classmates how sick I was. So for the rest of the semester I taught them how to make her suffer. Finally the semester ended. I could leave this school without any academic punishment. I was so sick that I looked like death. The classmates continued what I started. She wasn't teaching there next year. After I recovered I finished school. I graduated with a scholarship. If there's one thing that bothers me, it's child abuse. Standing up to her ruined my health, but it was worth it. When I was a sophomore in high school, I got in trouble for going off campus during lunch. Only juniors and seniors were allowed to go off campus at my school, and the school would sometimes post a staff member at the parking lot gates to check student IDs and bust people. This particular day, we had returned from lunch before they posted the staff member at the gate and were just eating our lunches in the car, so I'm thinking I'm safe. At the end of the lunch period, I got out of the car and tried to sneak to the side exit of the parking lot so I would be less likely to be seen. To my dismay, I hear someone calling from across the parking lot. Looking over, I see a fellow sophomore of mine who had been caught by this staff member. He was also going off campus for lunch, and he's pointing at me. He ratted me out. We both had to do a lunch detention later that week. I was so mad. The next week, however, I found that my fellow classmate had misplaced his textbook, which he was expected to return at the end of the year or face a hefty fine. I'm not certain what happened to that textbook, but I can tell you that it didn't get returned at the end of the year. An eye for an eye. So in essence, I was the one who was taken down with my classmate, but I got some retribution in the end. Bit late to the party and a lot less serious than some of the other comments, but I'll share my story regardless. My first girlfriend, we'll call her Georgia, was best friends with this girl, we'll call her Sarah, who my best friend had a crush on. They were talking, and my best friend was asking my girlfriend for some advice on what Sarah would be interested in. Unbeknownst to us, Georgia had a master crush on my best friend and saw this as an opportunity to make a move. She began spreading false info about Sarah to me and telling me that she was a slut and not worth his time and that I should warn him. She then began to become very flirtatious towards my best mate and started messaging him non-stop. He, however, was right next to me showing me all the messages she had sent to him. We decided that we were gonna take her down by sinking down to her level. We began to take screenshots of the messages in which Georgia was spreading rumors about Sarah and then created 2 fake chat logs, one which made me look innocent and one which made him look innocent. My best friend sent his set to Sarah and we both went to bed. We both woke up the next day to our phones going off. Georgia had been messaged by tons of people calling her a liar and saying how she was a terrible friend. I sent through my set of screenshots through acting all innocent. She then came over to my house to talk this all over. She walked into the lounge to me and my best friend chilling on the couch playing video games. She began to frantically apologize and say it was a mistake. I just got up, gave her a hug, and whispered in her ear, "I know exactly what you did. Now be a good little hoe, grab your things, and get the facts out of my life." We haven't seen each other since. I got a whole house kicked out. Sorry guys, this is kinda long, and also my very first post on Reddit ever. This was only last spring/early summer. I was living with my best friend at the time. Let's just call him Dylan. And his girlfriend Janice, and one other mutual friend George. Of course all fake names. We had been living in a duplex in northern Alberta. Now everything was fine at the beginning, as always. Eventually Janice starts to get annoyed at things like not doing dishes on time, or not taking out the trash enough. Understandable, but instead of talking to us properly about it, she complains to her boyfriend Dylan. Dylan is a more aggressive person and doesn't really care about being nice or friendly, no matter who you are. So he yells at us and writes notes on a little whiteboard that's on our fridge about how we need to be responsible adults and clean up after ourselves and whatever. Fine, done. We clean up ourselves and things actually start to change. But Janice, for some reason still unknown to me and George, continues to complain to Dylan about these things in the notes, and yelling matches continue. Although now it's about how George smokes weed in the house, which is not true, and how I don't take care of my cat who I absolutely love and adore and feed every day. The dishes and trash continue to come up as well, and God knows what else she said about us. It was at this point that George and I decide to not eat at the house anymore and now refuse to talk to the couple. We stay in our rooms and go out to eat. That seemed to really piss Dylan off. He would barge into our rooms and try to talk to us that way and would purposely play music late at night to keep me up and then also slam doors very loud during the day to keep George up, who worked night shift by the way. I should also mention that Dylan and Janice are a very dysfunctional couple and argue almost every night. I'm sure you all know that this is a very bad way of resolving the issue. At this point George and I went to the rental manager to try to report these problems, but she said we couldn't do anything about it other than file noise complaints. Dylan started to get more aggressive after that, having once locked George outside of the house for 4 hours in -40°C after Janice stole his house key, and threatening to fight us in the front yard. We continued to tell the rental manager about it, and she suggested that we try to leave the lease agreement. But in order to do that we need to have mutual signatures from all of the tenants, and that obviously wasn't going to happen. Yes, we did try to talk to the others and they refused to sign anything. This now went on for another 3 or 4 months. George had left to live in a different apartment but still paid rent at this one. I was too financially unstable to do that myself, and one night I finally broke and sent one very long email to the rental manager about everything they had done, including videos and pictures of their arguments and messes that they blamed on George and I. I tried my best to cover everything. She replied in less than half an hour telling me that she's spoken with the landlord and every single one of us had until the end of the month to leave. We also had a checklist of what we needed to clean in the house to prepare for new renters. Finally, I packed my stuff and left almost immediately. Of course, as I did that, I was called a bussy and a tattletale and screamed at by Dylan as I packed. He sent me texts telling me I missed stuff at the house and then tried to get me to clean up more of his garbage. And I refused to do it because of his attitude. Plus I left that month to visit family in a different province, leaving him to finish the entire checklist on his own. He refused to pay the full amount of his final rent and told me to do it. After some arguing I eventually just did it to just finish the process and not speak to him after that. The rest is history. I haven't spoken to him since, but George and I are still friends and talk to each other. Quick disclaimer for anyone about to move out. Please know who your friends are before moving in with them. You'd be extremely surprised as to how different they are when living with them. My sister was divorcing her first husband, and with our parents being super traditional and Christian, she was scared feckless to tell them. She confided in me about it and told her I wouldn't say anything because it was her own business. I had also found out that same week that I was expecting my first child, and even though my boyfriend and I were adults, we were still pretty young and obviously not married. I was stupid enough to trust my sister with this information because I was also scared feckless to tell my parents. I knew it would come out eventually, but like my sister I wanted to tell them in my own time and in my own way. Well, I don't know how my folks found out about her pending divorce. It was most likely from her then husband, because they had one child together. I just know I didn't tell my parents anything. My sister just assumed I had gone behind her back and told them, so she told them about my pregnancy, to take the heat off of herself, and have it all put on me. My parents were absolutely livid with me, and really ashamed of me. I did eventually marry the boyfriend, and we had 2 more kids. Funny thing is, years later my mom was begging me to get out of that marriage, which I eventually did. I'm still working on mine. I've had this friend who was my first ever friend, and we went to different schools starting second level education. We'd meet up over the summer and breaks and all that, and we'd share life updates. During summer 2017, I was going through a proper mental breakdown. When I met up with her, I told her very personal secrets about myself and others. I thought I could trust her. A few months later, I learned she told multiple people my secrets, even those that included my crush. I was destroyed. It felt like my bones were malleable yet frozen. I know how this may sound. How/why are you still working on bringing her down with you? It was over 2 years ago. I thought that too. Turns out, almost her entire year, with a lot of people who know me, I know my deepest secrets because of her. She has tried to ruin the relationship of my crush and his girlfriend by using my secret against him. I think people in my school who don't know her know my secrets because that's how many people she told. She took advantage of me when I was down and suicidal and still uses it to this day for her own gain. But I'm going to bring her down, trust me. I'm not on the level of sharing all her secrets, because I know some pretty damning ones, and I'm not that type of person. I'm a creative type, and love to write music. I love to listen to music too. Yep, I'm writing a song vlogging about her to get back at her. Not enough for everyone to know who I'm on about because I'll get sued probably, but that people would realize that it makes sense if I told them. And I want to invite her to a live performance of mine one day, say this is for a special someone who has done a lot to me, and just play a cover of FOD. She doesn't deserve the confirmation that it was about her. She can live with the anxiety of was it about me? For the rest of her life, like I had for the last 2 years. I know this doesn't really count, since I haven't done it yet and it's not the exact same as what she did to me. I will make sure to update when things get closer to happening, as so far I'm almost done writing the song. My wife and I both worked at a restaurant when we first got together. It's actually where we met. She was a server and I was a line cook. On a busy Saturday night, after working a double, she started her phase work to leave for the night and she came back to the kitchen bawling her eyes out. Of course I asked what's wrong, and she told me when she went to cash out for the night she came up a couple $100 short for the day. She was told she would have to pay it or she was fired on the spot. She couldn't pay, and it was bullshit anyway. When the line and a few other people heard what was going on, we instantly staged a walkout. On a Saturday night right after the first dinner rush, the restaurant lost 3 line cooks and 3 servers. We went to a campsite and drank beer and burned our uniforms lol. We found out from another employee the next day they discovered a problem with the point of sale system and all the servers came back short. The restaurant's response was to not let anyone keep their tips for the night, since they didn't know what was tip or actual check amounts. Now we were young and not nearly as responsible as we probably should have been, but when you work in the restaurant industry, jobs aren't hard to come by. When I was in middle school, my older sister thought it would be a good idea to have my neighbor who was about 2 years older than me carry me and throw me into the pool. And I was just chilling when all of a sudden everyone took out their phones and started recording me as my neighbor picked me up like a baby and took a running start as he threw me into the pool. Keep in mind this kid was much bigger than me, probably by about a foot and a lot stronger, so I tried to struggle out but I couldn't. At this point I was like a foot from being launched and accepted my fate, but was like AWW hell no. So when he threw me, I grabbed him in like a headlock and Randy knockouted him in the pool with me. Everyone was laughing, and I was fine with it, until he got out all pissy, because he had his phone in his pocket. His excuse was he didn't think he was gonna fall in, and his parents tried to make my parents pay for a new phone, but they didn't in the end, because it was ultimately his decision to do so. Honestly though, when it happened it felt epic as facts. It was a slow motion part in a film. Final point, don't bring your phone near the pool. When my husband and I first started dating, I smoked pretty heavily, like a pack or more per day. His mother hated smoking, even though his father also smoked at the time. So I always hid from her the fact that I smoked. My husband also smoked at the time, and hid it from her too. So one night we are out to dinner with all of my husband's family. Parents, grandparents, aunts, and uncles. It was a huge party, so naturally the service was pretty slow. After about an hour at the restaurant, still waiting on our food, I start jonesing for a cigarette. I hadn't smoked since I'd gotten off work several hours before, so his mom wouldn't smell it on me. So I ask my husband for the keys to his truck, because I need to grab something from inside it. I thought he'd get the hint and just give me the keys. His mom asks where I'm going, and he throws me under the bus. Oh, Vaughn 11 needs a cigarette, so she's going to smoke. I'm mortified and a little pissed off at my husband, so I say, well, they're your son's cigarettes. He smokes, too. She goes, he knows better than that. I didn't know you smoked, with a disappointed look. I'm flabbergasted that she doesn't believe he smokes too. Flash forward about a year. We are engaged and living together at this point. My mother-in-law comes out to my house to show me some things she'd found for the wedding. She walks in, and there's a pack of cigarettes sitting on the entryway table. She says, okay, who's going to quit first, you or my husband? This time it was my turn to throw my husband under the bus. I pulled up my sleeve and showed her my patch. I said, actually, I quit a few weeks ago. Those are your sons, and if you don't believe me, go take a look in his truck when he gets home, and I guarantee you'll find a pack in the cup holder. So she did, and he got a lecture about smoking. Served him right. Throw me under the bus, and I'll do it right back. Okay, so this one is going to start off pretty heavy, but bear with me. I was sexually abused as a child by my oldest brother. He moved away from my town over 10 years ago. Our whole family disowned him for different reasons. When I went to the police recently, they invited him to the station for questioning. He obviously did what most abusers do, and lied about the whole thing. Not only did he lie though, he dragged another family member into it, and told the police he made him do it to me. This was his way at getting back at me for reporting him to the police, I guess. Anyway, the case got complicated then dropped. He thought he had gotten away with it all. I suppose you could say he has, but he underestimated me for the small vulnerable kid I was. Now I'm an angry man. I plastered what he did to me along with his picture all over social media. I then messaged his girlfriend who he had just had a baby with, and told her everything. It's safe to say that I turned his life upside down, and I feel like it's more than justifiable. After all, I need to live with the effects of what that sick bastard did to me every single day. It felt good to drag him down with me. In high school I was in an engineering class. The final project was building and programming a simple robot to accomplish certain tasks in an obstacle course. The entire class was divided into groups of 3, and we all sat in rows together with computers in front of each of us. My teammates were both slackers, one had zero self-control, and would spend the whole class looking as funny pictures, the other was lazy as fax, and never did anything in school. I had a 4.0 grade point average, and was doing my best to maintain it, so for the entire class I did all of our group's projects alone. I only got them to help with things once or twice, and they usually made things take longer than if they hadn't been there at all. Well, the final project was more work than one person could do on their own. I tried to do it, but I was running multiple weeks behind. I kept trying to get them to help, but it was like trying to drag a bag full of bricks. I went to the teacher and told him, and he said part of learning management and leadership skills is knowing how to keep people in line, and refused to step in. I was never made team leader or anything. I was just the only one who gave a fuck. I tried to get stern and direct with them, but they still wouldn't respond at all, eventually putting on headphones and tuning me out entirely. I decided I was done trying to help my teammates and was going to throw them to the dogs. So, without telling them, I wrote a letter to the teacher. Paraphrasing, I said that what he said may be true, but learning when to walk away from projects in which your time is being wasted is just as important. I told him I was going to do the equivalent of abandoning the project by continuing to come to class every day, but using my time for something productive like reading or doing work for other classes. He never responded to me directly, but as grades came for the rest of the class, every entry for that project was a B. My teammates seemed quite happy at first that I had stopped nagging them to help me, until they realized that I wasn't working on the project at all. As the due dates loomed, they started to ask me why I wasn't working on it. I told them I had tried before and realized I couldn't do it alone, so I gave up. They continued to not do anything, presumably calling my bluff. In the final week of class they started to try to finally do something, but they were completely lost because they hadn't paid any attention all class long. I had done all the previous assignments alone for our team. When they came to me for help, I'd try to help them learn or figure out the math behind things, but I made it clear to them it wasn't my problem anymore. They ended up bombing the grade big time, though they both still passed thanks to all the A's I had gotten throughout the semester.